Many Indian Jews in London have become very observant, and I attribute this to a desire also to adhere to something familiar from the old home. But as they say, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, the study of the Torah supersedes everything. For this they derive their strength. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is another fascinating thread in the intricate tapestry of Jewish life and activity, all adding up to the romance of being a Jew. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and friends, I bring shalom from Israel. At the beginning itself, I thank the Wiener congregation as well as the museum, Jewish Museum of New York, for giving me this opportunity to say a few words about the Bnei Israel from the village of Pongtan to Israel. I mean, I'm going to highlight some of the Jewish life of the Bnei Israel from the Pongtan to Israel. I cannot boast of having done much of research on the subject, but my authority comes from the fact that I was born a Bnei Israel, brought up as a Bnei Israel, and have lived all my life among the Bnei Israel and non-Israel. Also among the Bnei Israel, because my activities are among the Bnei Israel. I was born in Ashtuni, which is one of the villages of the continent, and lived there till the age of 18 when I had to go to Bombay to resume my studies at the University of Bombay. Some of the memories of my place are still fresh in my mind. In the village of Ashtuni, there was a synagogue which was built by my grandfather. He had 11 sons and an equal number of daughters from his 2 wives. He allocated a piece of land, fertile land, for the maintenance of the synagogue, so that the synagogue could maintain itself from the produce of the land. I still remember the synagogue. The picture of the Bnei Israel going to the synagogue on Shabbatot and on festivals is still fresh in my mind. Then is the melody of the Shabbat songs and the Kiddush prayers sung, heard from each Bnei Israel house around my house. I remember the Selikot call. I think that has made a kind of an eternal memory in my ringing of the bell in my ears. I remember the morning Selikot call, when the Shamash used to come to the Jewish mohalla, or the corner in the gully or the lane, and call the names of the families. And I still remember that call. David, Aaron, Ashkanker, Selikot. And a little later, going to Sasun, Aaron, Ashkanker, Selikot. And then I remember the answering call of the heads of the families, thanking him for the service. As a child, I remember I used to run to the bedroom window from the first floor and look down upon that mysterious figure carrying a kerosene lantern in one hand and a walking stick in the other. In the misty dawn hours of the monsoon in Ashtuni. And then I used to go to the synagogue with my father, and the villagers used to be fast asleep at the time. And my father exploited this opportunity to give us a lesson in nature study. I remember the festive dishes and the delicious smell and the exchange of gifts. The song of the Bible, sung by my parents and many others, are still fresh in my mind. These serve 2 purposes. One was to put the children to sleep, and second was to give a Jewish education. The Eve of Yom Kippur has a special imprint on my mind. The Hindu calendar is based on the phases of the moon, with the result that every 3 years they have an extra month, Shanat Mukberet we call it, as in the Jewish calendar. And one of the Hindu festivals used to fall exactly on the day of the eve of Yom Kippur. The Hindus used to carry their idols in a procession through the streets, singing and dancing, accompanied by musical instruments. Our village used to get an appearance of a village fair, because the farmers from the surrounding villages used to flock to that village, accompanied by their wives and children in their colorful, festive garments. They were there, the men used to be dead drunk. I mean, literally as well as figuratively. Literally because they had consumed even a quantity of liquor, and figuratively because of the ecstasy of the religious faith. Then came the time for the Jews, for the Bnei Israel to go to the synagogues. And these elders among these Hindu people, Hindu crowd, used to make way for the Bnei Israel to go to the synagogue, avoiding not to even to touch us, because they used to be clad in white after the spiritual bath, and they used to consider, they knew that it was the holiest of our holy days, so they were so eager to keep our holiness intact. And when the procession passed the synagogue, they stopped singing and dancing and resumed it only after considerable and adequate hearing distance from the synagogue. This part of the tolerance, religious tolerance, I'm going to refer to it. Even the day after Yom Kippur, I remember very well. Some of the other Hindus knew that that is a day of giving alms. And the poor, Muslims and Hindus, used to flock to the Bnei Israel houses and stand in queues in front of their houses. And I remember how each one of them was given a measure full of rice with lentils, a coin, and special donuts which were prepared for the special occasion for the meal after that. A widow received an additional piece of cloth material for her blouse. An old man received a piece of cloth for his headwear. And they used to bless the people of Israel. Religious tolerance is the thing that I said I will refer to. And I think that is the reason why we could observe our religion undisturbed. But there is a reason why it was so. The Hindu religion is based on or divided into different caste systems. These caste systems are determined by birth. A person is born in that caste and dies in the caste. His occupation, his neighborhood, his marriage, everything is determined by his caste. With the result, there was no possibility of conversion from going from one caste to another. I think the Bnei Israel fitted in this framework completely. As long as we didn't disturb them, they didn't disturb us. We were given the autonomy and the religious freedom of practicing our religion. Difficult assimilation was almost impossible. Because again, I'm just trying to tell you this. In the Christian and Muslim countries, assimilation was easy because both these religions encourage conversion. The Hindu caste system, as it is at the watertight compartment, does not allow conversion at all. Whereas in Judaism, conversion is a difficult process. So it was a mutual understanding between these two, and that helped us. And if there is any case, excommunication was a penalty that was imposed on such couples. Many people argue that there was no anti-Semitism in India because the people of the Jews of India were not very rich. I accept the fact that they were not rich, but they were not the Rothschilds of India, but at the same time, they held comparatively, relatively higher social and financial status. But only the religious tolerance of the Indian people made it possible to follow our religion. Of course, since the days of the establishment of Israel, there has been a little change. The government of India openly goes against Israel, but that doesn't mean that she is against the Jews of India. The Jews enjoy the freedom, and one example of that freedom can be even shown in the fact that even after the establishment of the State of Israel, Dr. Girard, one of the eminent doctors of India, was awarded the Padma Shri, the highest rank that government of India confers upon people, a Jew. The actor David was also awarded an award like that. And that was after the establishment of the State of Israel. That shows that the Jews are still the citizens of Israel, of India, and they are still getting all their freedom of existence. About Israel? Okay, let's say that. I'm sorry.
That the time is getting on, and I thought that what she's going to speak about, she gave me just an inkling of what she is going to speak about, and we might be able to elicit that in the question and answer. What she is going to talk about is the one subject which is very important here, namely the Bnei Israel in Israel, of which she has much experience. So as to that, I'm sure we all ask her questions on that score. I intend to take just a few minutes to round up this debate at this moment, because we are already running short of time. I want to refer to one or two points. You see, we have said that we settled in India, we were farmers. We became oil pressers. But we were not only the oil pressers, but we were also in the business of selling oil. And on Saturday, no oil was sold in the Konkan. And to this day, although there's only one family which is doing the oil business, no oil will be sold in the Konkan, which shows that they must have been really the prime business people in that particular type of business. Now you want to know how we were treated by the Hindus. Obviously we were treated very well. They thought, as the Romans, that we were a peculiar people, wasting 1/7 of our lives in rest. But they realized that and of course they worshipped the cow, but while they worshipped the cow, they realized we were the ones who on Saturday wouldn't yoke the ox to the cart, or we wouldn't ride a horse, and we would give rest to animals. It was something which was, for them, it was wonderful. Now you must also realize that our practices were so antithetical to theirs. We have the Brit Milah, which for them is an anathema. We bury our dead, they cremate the dead, and so on. But these sort of things didn't come in the way of their trying to treat us well. Now there is the other question about the revival of Israel, the revival which takes place among them in Israel. Mr. John Perry has mentioned about David Rabi in the 18th century. That I think is a gross mistake, with all due respect, my friend. Because you will find that referred to in Heinz Daniel's book. In that he said, that already it was 900 or 600 or 200 years. Now if it's 200 years at the turn of the century, it would still be somewhere in the 17th century. Now there is a dispute as to who it was, but if you put this figure on the 18th century, as some of the people are trying to do, then what you are trying to do is completely eliminate what I would call the Book of Judges. It should be like the Tanakh without the Book of Judges. Because what really happened was this, and that is said, according to Einstein Tinker and others, that there was a revival by David Rabi, who didn't come from Cochin, as it said, but who came from Egypt. And whether he came from Egypt or where he came from, that is not very important, but he was the person who came and realized what it was. According to Dr. Steinberg, who was for many years the cultural director of the World Jewish Congress, he felt that he might well have been the brother of Moses Maimonides, David Maimonides, who came to India because he was doing business in precious stones. It is possible he may have been him. But whether he was here, who it was, whether there was one David Rabi or many more, that is not so important. That's the fact remains that when he did come, they chose persons from 3 families to be the leaders, guides, and friends of the community. One was the Shapurkar family, one was the Raupurkar family, and one was the Girard family, of which I am a member. And we became the Qadis of the community. Now the regime of the Qadis went on, lasted, until the synagogues were set up. at the end of the 18th century. That is about 1796, you had the first synagogue in Bombay, and then you had 7 synagogues there. You had some synagogues before, but until these synagogues were set up, the whole life of the community was carried on by our family. We became what the Pekadis mean the judges. We became the judges of the community. We were entitled to special fees. We were entitled to special honors from time to time. And these functions of these classes were accepted by the local rulers, because without the local rulers endorsing their power, they could not exercise their power properly. So you have these sermons which go on from time to time between you. My father, I remember, had many of these things, and he talked to me about them. Unfortunately for us, he lived in Quetta at the time when he retired. He had a whole room full of small prophecies. And we had, unfortunately, that big earthquake in 1935, which destroyed the whole house. Nothing was left of it, except we were lucky that my father and my family were able to escape. So there were, there are, I think it's still available in the Bombay High Court, is one way to make a research. Because in the last century there was a question arose, whether there was some sort of a divorce case something going on, who would have the jurisdiction? Whether it would be the Girard family, who claimed to be the Girard Qazi, who claimed to be the judges, or whether the High Court of Bombay. But the court has, the suit has been brought to the High Court of Bombay, and the High Court said, well, look, if you look at our charter, the charter does give us this power. Of course, the charter also makes it clear that all existing jurisdiction continues. So they said, well, it so happens that we have got concurrent jurisdiction. The Girard Qazis have it, and so have we. But since we are already seized of the matter, we will continue to exercise it. Now, there are those papers which are available which can be looked at. And actually, I said the power of the Qazis was went into the lessons. One of the synagogues was then set up, and they were up there. Now, let me tell you one or two other things. We have not just mentioned one very important factor, that there is some sort of affinity between being a farmer and being a soldier. And about 500-600 years ago, we adopted another ancillary trait, shall I say, of being army officers in the regiment of the various Maharajas and Rajas. Later on, it was the East India Company, to cut a long story short, who employed our people. And a recent search has established that at the time of the mutiny, 50% of the Indian officer class of the East India Company consisted of the Bnei Israel. There is also the fact that our Indian women were the pioneers in many things. They were the pioneers as nurses. They were pioneers as teachers. Indeed, you will find a very beautiful passage in my great grandfather's book, Einstein Yulkeinka, in which he says, talking of women, he says, look, we may not have had rabbis, but the people who preserved Judaism among the Judaism were our women. Now with that, let me make one brief reference to a very important community we have met, that is the Cochin community. They had a very glorious history. They had in fact a great kingdom, a Jewish kingdom in India, which is stated may well have been from about 400 or 500 of the current era till about 1492. The 1492 is the figure you find it referred to in Ben Sweet's book, The Exile and the Redeemed, a kingdom which lasted almost 1,000 years, and it was destroyed when the Portuguese came to India, when the General Albuquerque came to India. Then there were some figures. It was a very strange, confused history at the time, and they were driven out, and he swore that he would strike every Jew that was there. And these Jews, they found refuge with the Maharaja of Cochin, who gave them an exclusive area called Jewtown. And this was one place where the Jews were not, didn't pay any tax. Now with that, I think, as I say, the history is very large. We can talk of many different aspects of the situation, but that's how it is. I will now leave this, the floor open for you to ask questions. Thank you.
That was very difficult.
talks about Delhi or... In Delhi we have the Judah Ball, of which, I was one of the president for some time, and this was built, as you know, many, many years ago, in 1956 or so, we celebrated the 21st anniversary. You see, our Jews in Delhi were mostly people who came from Bombay and Pune and settled down there because of the government service. But they are the same sort of stock as the people from Bombay and Pune. Yes, you wanted to add?
Just to add very briefly that, of course, we know very well the present president of the community in Delhi, Mr. Ezra Collett, who was a distinguished civil servant in the government of India, and that this Judah High Hall is a center not only for the Bene Israel Jews, as Mr. Gerard mentioned, who are a community in Delhi, but also a number of foreign Jews who come to Delhi for various purposes, business or government, the European Jews or American Jews, and so it's quite a center, and I know that whenever any of my Jewish friends from England, Ashkenazim, go to Delhi, without fail I give them the address and name of Ezra Collett, and they're very pleased to meet me.
The main synagogue in Calcutta was founded by the father of the late Ezra. He's actually one of the students. And they have just celebrated their centenary synagogue. I think, without contradiction, it is one of the finest synagogues in the world.
I'm very glad that Mr. Bani Jacob himself is from a most distinguished Calcutta Jewish family. He and Elias and company has mentioned that. And I would welcome him here together with his sister Felicia, his brother-in-law Sanu, and Felicia's husband. It's quite right that the Magen David Synagogue, I think it was in January or February of this year, did celebrate its centenary. And there was in Calcutta a very distinguished Jewish community who adhered, I think, most closely and commendably to our Babylonian Baghdadian Jewish minhag. And today, of course, it's just about 200, I think, are left. But they constitute the main membership, in fact, of the two synagogues in London, Ohel David and Gan Eden, which were founded by the late Rabbi Solomon Sisi.
Yes.
I wonder if you could tell us how the name itself is cleared in Israel.
Yes, I think I will ask Monica to answer. And to that, I will add a few observations of mine as well.
The Israel, the absorption in Israel was rather difficult, but everybody will give a different version of the point, depending upon his own experiences. Absorption is difficult because of certain things, certain reasons. For example, the culture shock and the language shock. That's the first thing. And I can give you the example of the language shock, that the very highly educated people suddenly become ignorant. They sound ignorant when somebody else interprets something for you. Then the children pick up in Hebrew faster than the parents, and the son explains to his father what is written in a letter, just reversing the picture of the father explaining things to his son, which sometimes creates a very bad inferiority complex among the parents. That's, I'm giving you an example of a language shock. The example of a culture shock is also there. For example, when I immigrated to Israel, I was 40 years old. For my friends, for outsiders, I was Mrs. Samuel. For my cousins and this, I was Sister Samuel, Sister Flora. For my nieces and all, I was Aunt Flora. Suddenly you come to Israel and at a tiny talk of three calls you Flora. You get a shock. Another culture shock, I can give a very good example of culture shock. Among the Bene Israel, it's a custom, I don't know whether it is in the other, but at least in Ashtami it was a custom that when you pay a condolence visit to Bene Israel, living family, we are generally offered tea without milk and boiled egg. Now when I came to Israel, we landed in Israel, we landed at 9. So we had to be at the transit camp. I was, as it is, crying all the time because I was separated from my family, particularly my father was 95 years old then. I was crying all the time. And what are we offered? Tea without milk and boiled egg. I began to cry. could understand it. Now there were other two ladies, the Israel ladies. They also observed this. One of them says to the other, "Bye. Yeah, so I hope." In Marathi, he said, that means, "Sister, what is all this? You have given us tea without milk and boiled egg." The other one wants to sound rather more intelligent than her. She says, some leader of Israel must have died today. That's why the whole nation is in mourning. Now these are the culture shocks. Understand? Now language also created difficulties in getting jobs. Language. Many people had to fight for their rights. I don't say, particularly the people from India. Discrimination was another thing. Not because of the color. Mind you that. Not because of the color. Because of the wrong notion that India is a primitive country where they cannot reach any intellectual standards. People coming with high qualifications. I'm giving you my own example. I had to fight for 7 years to get my teacher's license. And for what purpose? Because, please mind, I'm not anti-Israel. Please, I'm just giving you an example. I was asked to take up, to do a course in Hebrew, Bible and all these things. I was ready to do it. But when they realized that I'm from India, they added methodology. And I said, on principle, I don't accept this idea. Because I have a BA, which is a Bachelor of Training. I got a Master of Education, 16 years of teaching experience in a high school, out of which 9 years as the principal of a Jewish school, having 1,400 children. And at the age of 40, I was humiliating by taking up this course. I have objected. I had to convince them and tell them the education, the method, my methods are just suitable for Israel because I studied English as a second language, I taught English as a second language, and in Israel they teach English as a second language. Then I was exempted from that. But 7 years passed. Then I got my teacher's license. Later on, but I got a nervous breakdown, and 1.5 years I couldn't teach. And then I got a job and all those things. Even then, when I was sent to a course at Bar-Ilan University, I don't know why I was sent there. What do I see? For 2 months they are teaching us English literature. English literature. I am surprised why it should be so. So after 2 months there was a time when there was a day when the head of the department interviews all the teacher candidates. I am interviewed by a very eminent professor. He asked me the question, where did you complete your education? I said, in India, in Bombay. No, I don't think you stand a chance of passing this course. It's a very tough course. I protested. I didn't give it. I protested. It's all right, I'll allow you 1 more year, 1 more month to be in this course. And he tried his best to check, to test my knowledge. I stood up. I proved myself. And then I came to know that course was meant for teachers whom the government, the Department of Education had recruited during the days when there was a severe dearth of teachers. They had no formal university degree. And the government decided, the Education Department decided to give them an intensive course in English literature to prepare them, because they are already working, they didn't want to fire them. And I was put among them. And then when I left the course, I went to the university, took another course, and I studied. I got the teacher's license. These are some of the examples.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just add one statement. My experience 11 years in Israel. Israel is not on a statement. It's said in Hebrew, Mishe Yoshev al Yad Salachat Ocher Kodem. It means whosoever sits near the plate eats first. So that's the way it goes with the immigrants. With India, the immigration began in 1950. The other Jews that come earlier, whosoever comes late has to wait for his turn to eat. Our Venezuelans in Israel are very well organized now, and every small group has a political party, and we ran our own political party in the last general election. No one was elected, it was a good party. That's it.
Well, I think I may just add a few words. I don't want to be ungrateful to Israel and their leaders, because perhaps I was treated very, very exceptionally, and I don't want it ever to be carried to them that I was not grateful for it. But that really shows how badly others were really treated. When I went, I had a red carpet treatment. I was received by the Foreign Office. I was meet the guest of the government for about 2 weeks to stay at the hotel at extent. And then they gave me the passport immediately. They gave me a job immediately. one of the highest paying jobs. They gave me a beautiful house in Vishwanath Akarman. So I had personally nothing to complain about. But I did notice that my colleagues would come from there, sometimes some doctors with the highest degree from England. Not merely degrees from Indian universities, but from English universities. They were just throw your in, you don't, I don't think you know that much. And they were satisfied. And some of them were compelled to remove themselves from government appointments to go take on something else. But I don't want to go into that so much. There was also the Rambanut who began to make distinctions. Although the Jews were recognized as Jews for the purpose of the law of return, when it came to the question of marriages, they had to be complete. Fortunately, the recent announcement about 2 years ago by the Rambanut should have cleared this thing. But now and again, presumably, things might arise. And it used to be very urgent that this should be done, only with regard to one particular type of people. Although there are people coming from other parts of the world where the people have probably forgotten their religion for 20 and 30 years, but simply because they came from their own so-called stock, which is, as we say, there is no particular thing was done. However, as I say, we were involved in this, we had to settle down, and now I suppose that being the second generation, the third generation of Israelis, one can expect a far better treatment from them. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
Well, I was wondering, because I gather Jews have their own synagogue and their own community, or would they
Where? Where? In Bombay, I think you should go to the answer. There is a couple of Baghdadi synagogues in Bombay, and generally they go to their own synagogues. But it's, there are also the neighbors who go to their synagogues sometimes. That's what happens.
May I just add, you asked about Baghdadi Jewish synagogues in Bombay and London. I did mention in the course of my remarks that there is in the area of Fort, known as Fort Bombay, the Knesset Eliyahu Synagogue, founded by Sir Jacob Sassoon, which celebrated its centenary this year, and this was inaugurated by the President of India. May I just say that I'd like to welcome, if I may, some Bombay Jews in the audience. First of all, there's Mr. and Mrs. Victor Cohen, who are American Jews, born and bred, but who happen to be in Bombay during the time of the celebration. Secondly, there's Mr. Easy Bashi. Then there's also Doreen and Henry Khan. And also there's Rene Shohet, who was educated in Bombay. May I just also say that my brother Archie and his wife Mary Ann, who are putting me up, or should I say putting up with me, and also my cousin Anya Gorji and her mother. But another synagogue in Bombay is the Magen David Synagogue in Baikala, the Baikala area of Bombay. Now, the amazing thing is that the fourth synagogue, although it's got such a small number of men to draw upon, just about 20 or 30, they do provide 2 minyanim every day, morning and evening for Mincha and Arbi. And it is really amazing that this continues, and I noticed this when I was in Bombay in April this year. In Baikala, they get a minyan, just about get a minyan for Shabbat. And it is rather regrettable, but most of the Baikala Jews have gone to London. And they are prospering there. In fact, many of the Baikala Jews have now settled in Hendon, and they are members of that yeshiva synagogue called Odia Safai. Also I understand in Israel, for instance, in a place called Goldani, which is in Haifa, there are a number of Bombay Jews from Baikala who have settled and who have in fact got their own synagogue there, which they set up almost completely copying the Magen David Synagogue in Baikala and Bombay, both in its structure and also in the customs and in how to be observed.
Okay, may I suggest that it should be short so that we give people an opportunity to ask questions. Yes, please.
Pakistan, Muslim people are really Indian, except for some Arabs. And in Bangladesh, of course, they are Indians who became Muslims, sometimes by force. Is it possible that when the Muslims entered India, they left the Jewish population alone?
Yes, I think the situation is this, that the Muslims have been in India for many hundreds of years. And their approach to the Jewish community has been a very beautiful one, just as the Hindus have never disturbed the Jewish community. In fact, this is a story that you ought to know, because it's a very important one in our history. At the time that I said to you that there are Jews who were fighting with the opposites of the East India Company. The East India Company had waged a war against Tipu Sultan of Mysore, who was a fanatic Muslim. He was able to capture, fortunately able to capture the East India Company troops, among whom there was an Israel by the name of Shamul and Dureka. They were all brought before Tipu Sultan, who was very harsh to us, and the only way the war was to give an option of being converted to Islam or to be beheaded. So he came to this particular person, he asked him, what is your name and what is your religion? And he said, my name is Shamul and Dureka, I am of Bnei Israel. His mother was looking down from the balcony, and she said to him, to Tipu, Tipu, look, these people are our Kitabis. They're the people who believe in the same God as we do. They don't need to be converted. We are enjoined by our prophet that we should honor them. And so he called us in the state, and in due course he went there, and he built the first synagogue in Bombay in 1796. 1796 it was built there. The first Mishpalaha which was given was to the Begum who made this synagogue possible.
Just a small short to the point. I think to an extent you were right. The Muslims as such were never anti-Jewish. That's one of the reasons we follow us as Bnei Israel. But the 6-day war took them by surprise, and they were so upset about victory of Israel over Arabs that there were policemen around Senegal. The war later on between Israel and Arabs, the Indian police took for granted Israel is going to win, and as soon as the war started, there used to be policemen near the Senegal. It was just for the safety of the synagogue and it.
That as regards Muslim attitude towards the Jews, in 1943 there was held in Bombay, as I said, this council meeting of the All India Muslim League, of which the president was Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the founder of Pakistan. But in 1948, when Israel was established in May, there was a tax made on the synagogue in Karachi, which was then the capital of Pakistan, which occasioned the number of the Jews to leave there with Hindu refugees. May I just say that regarding your comment about the origin of the Muslims in India, that it is true that about 500 years ago or so, they were Hindus, but they converted to Islam under the impact of the Muslim invasion of India. And very few of them know anything about the Muslims in the Middle East. But it was only in order to show their sense of solidarity with their so-called Palestinian Arab brethren that in fact in 1948 they attacked the Jewish synagogue in Karachi, and in other ways tried to show their opposition to Israel.
I think that we all have to remember that this phenomenon of the Muslims against the Jews is a very recent one. You have to remember it was the Ottoman Turks who saved the Jews in 1492. We all forget that. And they saved the whole community.
Yes, I know. And the thing is, we are only talking about really talking to the past. What is happening today might easily happen anywhere because of the struggle. There's also another beautiful instance in Bombay where there an attempt to have a bloodline against Jews. It was used as bloodline on the case of Muslim child and so on. And it was a Muslim leader who stepped down on this and ensured that he didn't give it for the country. Okay.
I know that you addressed the intergroup relationships within the Jewish communities in India. For example, the relationships between the Bnei Israel, let's say, and the Kochini Jews, or even the Bombay Jews, the Baghdadi Jews. I found, for example, segregation in the cemeteries in Cochin. I did not look at the cemeteries in Bombay, but I'm just wondering is there a caste system or is there a differential system which did segregate or separate the Jews within India?
Well, let me tell you, there are two different answers. There are, I won't say different answers, but it depends on what you're talking about. If you talk about the Cochin Jews, there was a special problem there. The Cochin Jews were divided into two groups called the white Jews and the black Jews. That had nothing to do with the Bnei Israel. It had only to do with the Cochin Jewish community. They were divided into black Jews and white Jews, and in between there were what they call the Rahim, who were probably the mixture of the two. So they had three different synagogues, and they wouldn't admit a person from one synagogue into the other. Of course, all this has died down, but it was an unfortunate piece of which existed, a situation which exists, and I wish I'm sure the people are utterly disgusted that should have happened. In Bombay, in Delhi, there was nothing. There were, of course, always occasions when there were some differences between the Baghdadi Jews and the Bnei Israel. There was a time in the early days when the Baghdadi Jews who came to India, they thought, well, we are like the British foreigners. They wanted to come up with the British. So there were some of them who at times tried to make out that they really didn't belong to the native population. Well, these things can happen at the time. There were, on the other hand, there were influential people like Sassoons and others who did a great deal for the Israel community and who were endowed with scholarships, etc., etc. Now, that itself is a very big question. I think that John Roland has been dealing with that question for some time. I don't think we would have the time to go into the relationship. But be it as it may, that's how the situation was. And how old the Cochin synagogue? I'm glad you asked that question because, see, the Cochin synagogue was built when the Karachi Jews went down to Cochin about 400 years ago. That we celebrated the 400th anniversary of that in 1968. It was at this anniversary that Indira Gandhi was present to receive the power of the Prime Minister of India. She went there at some risk to herself because her life was actually in danger at the time. But since she had been given her word, she went there. And she, on that occasion, she issued a stamp bearing the picture of the synagogue. Not only that, she herself inaugurated the celebrations. And in the course of that inauguration, she said something like this. He said, in this mosaic, which is India, composed as it is of many persons of different castes and creeds, the least numerous are as important to the beauty of the whole as the most numerous. And she meant the Jews of India. And she did recall all the many high offices to which the Jews had reached. And the Jews have indeed reached to almost every high office. We have had the Chief Justice of the High Court. We have had the very senior people in the Army and in the Air Force, almost 3 generals. Rear Admiral and very senior officers in the Air Force. We have had also with the civil services and in the legal profession as doctors. In fact, as women doctors, we're probably the pioneers in this field.
Mr. Chairman, may I just add a word about this matter? The president of the Cochin Jewish Synagogue, Mr. Sakakoda, is incidentally, I'm glad to say, married to my cousin Gladys. And so I have a particular interest because of that in the synagogue and know it rather intimately. And one of the fascinating features of that synagogue, and no doubt you'll hear about it later on, is that the tiles on the floor of the synagogue are all got a Chinese characteristic. And also the synagogue itself has got, unlike most other synagogues or all other synagogues, 2 bimas. One is on the top floor, one is on the ground floor. The one on the top floor is used for reading the Torah on Shabbat and festivals, and one on the ground floor is used for Mondays and Thursdays. And so, in fact, many people who go to Cochin are attracted by these unique features of the synagogue, and I might add that it's well worth a visit to Cochin just in order to see the synagogue.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, when was the major immigration of Bnei Israel?
When we organized a series of programs in conjunction with the exhibition Jews in India, we wanted very much to present the actual leading figures of the community from as far around the world as possible to speak on behalf of their community's history, its continuity, and its future. And we're very privileged to have with us this evening 4 very important members of the Indian Jewish community who come from far and near and who are going to share with us their observations, their personal recollections, and their impressions of Indian Jewry, past, present, and future. But before we start the program, I'd just like to make a few announcements. First of all, 2 of the speakers who had planned to be here this evening unfortunately are unable to be with us this evening. The first being Shalene Samuel, who as an attorney in the Indian Supreme Court discovered that his own professional calendar of trial precluded his being here at this particular time for this particular event. He plans to come to the United States in May, at which time perhaps we'll have an opportunity to present him to the museum's membership and audience, as he would have been very, very happy to this evening. Secondly, Joseph Sargon, another leading member and journalist of the Indian Jewish community, had also planned to be here, and unfortunately, he is ill. And although he tried very hard to be here, he discovered yesterday that his health was too delicate to be here. So we are sorry that we are missing him, and he may try to be with us if he can gather up enough strength on December 15th, if possible, because on that date, Dr. Johanna Spector is presenting her film about the Jews of Cochin, and perhaps he will try to be in the audience, and if there are any questions about the Cochin Jewish community, he will be available for your questions. So we apologize for their inadvertent absence. On the other hand, we are privileged to have an unexpected guest with us, whom we could not foresee would be here at this time, but we're delighted that she's here. That's Flora Samuel Dandekar, who will be speaking to us about the B'nai Israel community. Moderating tonight's program and also contributing as a panelist, we are delighted to have Mr. Elijah Girard, and to just acquaint you with a few of the important aspects of his biography. I will give you some sense of his importance and significance in the Jewish community. He is a barrister at law of England at Lincoln's Inn. He is the senior advocate of the Supreme Court of India, a designation corresponding to Queen's Counsel in England. He is author and editor of several books and publications on U.S. Admiralty, banking, and other laws, as well as on Indian company law. He is the former Judge Advocate General of the Indian Navy and advisor of Government of India on international maritime law from 1946 to 1964. He represented India at the first UN conference on the law of the sea and signed the final act on behalf of India. He did his war service in the Royal Indian Navy during the Second World War, attaining rank of commander, which rank has been bestowed for life. He was appointed member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire for distinguished service during World War II. He was advisor to the government of Israel on maritime trade and transportation from 1967 to 1971. He has been deeply involved in Jewish community affairs since college days, dating back to 1931, and has held numerous offices, including the following: President of the Jewish Welfare Association of New Delhi and Upper India, patron and founder member of ORT India. He represented Indian Jewry at the World Jewish Congress, and he also represented the World Jewish Congress at international conferences. He is presently president of Congregation Bina, a congregation of Jews from India, past president of Freedom Lincoln Lodge, B'nai B'rith, and several other institutions. He is presently assistant corporation counsel for the city of New York. And sincerely and from the bottom of my heart, I must tell you that had it not been for his assistance and the assistance of his friends and family and colleagues in Congregation Bina, the programs that we are presenting to you this season, the exhibition as you see it in the museum, would surely not have been possible. So we are very grateful and very delighted to present to you Elijah Girard.
Distinguished members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, I must express on behalf of Congregation Vienna, our thanks and felicitation to Jean Rosenstock and the museum for holding this lecture and indeed holding this whole exhibit about the Jews of India. It was a beautiful idea of theirs. We had attempted, I might tell you, to get the Indian government interested, but we had received early a very cold shoulder. And that in spite of the fact that hitherto the Jews have always been treated beautifully. However, now let me tell you the scope of the subject. The subject is the Jews from India, the Jewish community of India, from India to the United States, England and Israel. As you see, the subject traverses almost spatially, goes halfway around the world. The time continuum spans over 2,000 years. To you, my colleagues, who are so steeped in the history, life, lore, and legends of our people, who have been born to the religious, spiritual, and moral heritage of our people, and who are conscious of your responsibility not only to our people, but to this wonderful audience which you have from the greatest metropolis of the world, I am sure that you realize what a heavy burden you have. It is, as the poet said, I think, puts it beautifully, that we are here relatively holding infinity in the palm of our hand and eternity in an hour. Well, we will try and do justice to it. And without more ado, I should proceed at this moment to introduce the members of the panel. Okay, I should, perhaps the best thing would be that I have to go, there is no priority, there is no precedence among the panels, all members of the panels are all very equal. So I will start with the alphabetically the surnames. Flora Samuel Dandika. May I present you, could you please rise, that we all know you and share. We affectionately refer to her as Manikbai. We always have some good nicknames for people in India, and Manik means a ruby. And the Bai is always put after a woman's name as a matter of respect. So she is to us Manikbai. She has the honors degree in Sanskrit from the University of Bombay, as well as the Bachelor of Teaching and the Master of Education from that university. In fact, when she was going up for her graduate course in Sanskrit, the question was whether she should do Sanskrit or mathematics. And the dean said to her, look, you Jews, you have plenty, you have Einstein, and you have so many other mathematicians, but you have no one who has studied, you're very few perhaps, who have studied Sanskrit. So with your brilliance, we would like you to do Sanskrit. It's an extremely hard subject, but she did it. And she obtained the highest honors in that subject. She has been a teacher all her life. She was the principal of Sir Eli Kaduri School in Bombay from 1955 to 1964. That's one of the Jewish schools in Bombay. In 1964, she went to Israel, where also her whole life, since she retired recently, has been occupied in teaching. She was the principal, the coordinator of the English department in the Art School. She has lectured and taught Sanskrit at the Hebrew University for 3 years. In the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. She's also taken a great deal of part, she has taken part in other activities. She's been very active in the Federation of Indian Jews and she has been the General Secretary of the Indian Women's Organization in Israel and presently is their advisor. Now you will probably see some films, one of Benjamin Haim, and you will see her picture there, where she's also been doing the Kirtan, I believe. I think you'll be seeing her in perhaps many places. And we were very happy that she could come down to us and bring us to the authentic music that we have always had in the past in India. So she brings to this lecture, moreover, she was born in a village, and she brings to this lecture certain observations, certain expressions, which some of us who live mostly in the cities would not be able to do very well. Come to now my friend, Mr. Percy Gurji. He was born after the member of the Excellent Order of the British Empire. He was awarded that by the Queen for political and public service in India. He was born in Bombay and educated there. And like me, he also was a naval officer. He served during World War II with the Royal Indian Navy. In fact, my contact with him first time there was not easy, because I happened to be most of the time in headquarters. He was in Bombay, he was on the western coast, on the eastern coast. But he came to me in 1944 when he had written a book called The Jew and His Mission. And he wanted permission to have that book published, because there was a rule in India that any person in the service couldn't publish any book without the okay of the government. So it fell to my lot as the advisor of the Admiral to decide on this, but as usual, the Admiral always insisted that he should be told what I was doing. So I took this to him and I said, here is John Gurji, he has written a book about the Jew and his mission, and we'd like to publish it. And the Admiral said, look, every Jew has a mission. And the Admiral got there. He said, every Jew has a mission. And believe it or not, but for that mission, I do not know how we could have survived the hardships that the world and we have imposed upon him. And with that, of course, I gave him that permission. Of course, the Admiral said, please tell him not to use our rank. He was the honorary secretary, Mr. Gurji has been the honorary secretary of the Bombay Zionist Association and also the Central Jewish Board. He was the correspondent in India of the VAR, which is the History Daily. He is the delegate to the World Jewish Congress and to the World Zionist Conference. In London, he is the national chairman of Coalition, vice president of the British Zionist Federation, and former chairman of the Alliance Committee of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. He also said, fundamentally, and I'm sure he will do that again, it is better to have loved and lost than to not to have loved at all. And so he stood for Parliament. If he was, unfortunately, he was elected by his party to stand for Parliament. He didn't succeed. But I'm sure we all we hope that the next time he certainly will get there. And he's parliamentary correspondent and the member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs. So I present you Mr. Percy Gurji. Then comes, well, not then, we all have my friend John Perry. John Perry has been a journalist by profession, and he is an expert public relations person. He studied like me in St. Xavier's College, Bombay. That's where I studied it for my degree, first degree, before I went to England, and that's where he studied too. So we have a certain great affinity, because it was in India, at least in Bombay, many of Jewish families thought that they were not good Jews unless they went to St. Xavier's College. He was the chairperson. During those days, he was a champion of the Maharashtrian State Inter-University as a cyclist. He was an outstanding cyclist. And he was honored at the centennial celebrations of St. Xavier for outstanding achievements in sports and organizations. He represented India at the World Maccabeah. From an early age, he was educated, he was reared by Jewish and Zionist movements, like most of us were, but he is especially so. He is the president of the Jewish Youth Association of Bombay, honorary secretary of the Indian Zionist Organization, honorary secretary of Indian National in Israel, and executive of the Bombay Zionist Association. Formerly, he was a reporter of the Indian Express, Bombay. He was promoted as overseas correspondent to the Middle East. During his stay in Israel, he led the union of El Al Israel Airlines. He is now a supervisor in the Public Services Newspaper Division in the New York Public Library. He is vice president of our congregation, Bina, and more, he is the editor called Bina. In fact, thereby he is the keeper of our conscience. He has, in that capacity, he can criticize almost anything of what happens. He is a member of the Plaintiff, and I think in Marlborough. What is that? Manalat from Lodge. He's editor, of course, as I said, of Bina, and he's, of course, in addition to his duties, to the Republic, he helps the people. He's married and has 2 sons. The King's family here. John, your family. With that presents John Perry. I'm going to call upon John Perry to commence this discussion. He's going to speak mostly to start with the history and, of course, deal in good deal with the Bnei Israel group, our community. As you know, there are 3 main groups in India. There have been and there are. That is the Bnei Israel, the Scotian Jewry, and the Jews from Baghdad, who are roughly called Baghdadi Jews. They are from, not only from Baghdad, from the Middle East, from Iran and other places. Now, before we begin, I'm going to give you all, give each person about 10 minutes for his presentation, and therefore I don't want to impinge on your time, but I'm going to be brief. I wish to put forward only an idea of the historical perspective in respect of which John will be speaking. We are speaking of a people who went to India over 2,000 years ago. When you speak of 2,000 years ago, you start wondering what is 2,000 years ago in a country like America, which is only about 400 years old. This is perhaps something which, something strange. Obviously, it shouldn't be strange to our people, our Jewish people, because our history is already so long. But nevertheless, this is what happens in this country. Now, that period that happened to be, so far as India was concerned, one of the most vibrant periods in Indian history. The Professor Bastian, who is a professor of Indian history in the London School of Oriental Studies, in fact, has written a beautiful book called The Wonder That Was India. And he says that when we speak in those times of the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome, we must not forget about the wonder that was India. It was in those centuries that the Indian ships, they later on stopped going abroad. The Indians didn't become sailors very much. But in those days, their culture was spread to right through Southeast Asia. And they had a prolific trade between India and all those countries which surround the Mediterranean Sea. The exports were usually the same as spices. And they had beautiful fabrics. Even in those days, without machinery, they could manufacture the most exquisite fabrics. Some of the fabrics were so diaphanous that the Roman patricians once banned their import. In addition, they used to say you had the usual exports of civilization. You had the people who performed the rope trick. You had the dancing girls, the singing girls, and you had the prostitutes. And you had also these others who followed, the swamis and others. You can read all of that, and for the French literature is full of that kind of thing, dealing with that part. Not only that, but you'll be surprised to know that long before the Congress of Vienna had even thought about ambassadors and their duties, those were the days when the South Indian kings had an ambassador in Rome, and Rome had an ambassador in those South Indian kings. And same thing with Greece. They had an ambassador with the South Indian king, and the Indian ambassador came to Greece, or to various cities of Greece. So if you are dealing with a somewhat of a modern situation, a situation where even in those days they understood what the sanctity of the ambassador was, which is now misunderstood or not understood in many countries in the Middle East. So when we are dealing with that, this I think should give you a little background of the geopolitical history which existed at the time. I have not read what John is going to say, and I do not want to envision what he's going to say. But I'd like to add one more factor to this, that there is also the tradition of the Roman Catholics about St. Thomas the disciple who went to India in the first century. We had first century Christians in India, and there's a belief, there's a story which I've seen in many articles, which say that first when he went to a place called Thana, near Bombay. There he met with our ancestors and he tried to teach them the new religion. So these, the Bene Israel ancestors, they said, look, we are not a very learned people. You go down south, you'll meet a more learned people. He went there, as he entered the Jewish city, he was met by a Jewish girl playing the flute, who took her, and there was a wedding going on, he sang songs and so on. He tried to convert them, he wasn't particularly successful. Then he went right down to the tip of South India and converted Jews there. And there are Jews from India from that time, there are many of them who do their prayers in Aramaic. With that, I shall now call upon John Terry to take us next.
John Terry, born Yohanan ben Yeshai. John Terry is an recognized name. I will be dealing with the early history of my people, Bene Israel, the majority among the three groups of Indian Jews. The other two, as Mr. Chirag said, are the Baghdadi Jews and the Cochinese. And if time permits, I will add comments about the Bene Israel in US and Israel. The story of the Bene Israel is an old one. Exactly how old, scholars have disputed and continue to dispute. Some hold that they are one of the lost 10 tribes of the ancient kingdom of Israel, lost because they were, like other subjects, deported by the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III in 772 BC and simply passed out of history. The second theory, others believe that the Bene Israel were descendants of the Jews belonging to the two other tribes who formed the kingdom of Judah. As you know, the 12 tribes were named after the 12 sons of the biblical patriarch Jacob. When the kingdom of Judah was destroyed and Jerusalem was taken by the Babylonians in 586 BC, some of the Jews reached the west coast of India, and they are the Bene Israel. Yet another theory, and the one that I subscribe to, is that the Bene Israel and Hanukkah share a common origin. In 175 BC, the Syrian king Antiochus Epiphanes consolidated his grip on Judea by forcing Jews to convert to the state religion and by desecrating the temple in Jerusalem. Many Jews fled the country, while others, the Maccabees among them, took up arms, won, and thus originated the festival of Hanukkah. As a group which had fled before the victory of the Maccabees, the Bene Israel were not unaware of this event and hence celebrated Hanukkah approximately 1,000 years later. A fourth theory holds that they came to India on the 6th century CE when their ancestors left their homes in southern Arabia because of religious persecution. As I said earlier, I am convinced by the theory of Bene Israel sharing a common origin with Hanukkah, and I have my reasons for that. One, while my ancestors celebrated all of the Jewish festivals, they were late by 1,000 years to celebrate Hanukkah. Having fled from Judea, they were not in contact with the rest of the Jewry, and hence didn't know about the victory of the Maccabees. Two, some of the practices among the Bene Israelites, and which I have witnessed as a child but now discontinued, date back to the practices of the Jews during the first temple days. There were changes after the destruction of the first temple, of which we were not aware of for a long time. And the reason number three, as per the Imperial Gazetteer of India, and I quote, in the 2nd century, a Roman merchant fleet of 100 sails steered regularly from Neos Hormuz in the Red Sea to the Arabia, Ceylon and Malabar. It found an ancient Jewish colony, the remnants of which still remain to this day at the Bene Israel upon the Bombay coast. It is said that after fleeing Palestine, my ancestors were shipwrecked near Chehul. 7 men and 7 women survived. The bodies of the dead were buried, and still the cemetery in Navgaon bears a silent witness to our arrival in India. Due to the shipwreck, they lost everything in the sea, and in later years it was customary among my people to recite just the Shema Israel, whatever the occasion, whether it was death, marriage, birth, etc. However, when it came to custom, they retained all, including the observance of Shabbat, biblical holidays, and all the other festivals whom they also named in the local language Marathi, the dietary laws of kashrut, a ritual of circumcision, etc. And for generations thereafter, the religion of their forefathers was dear to them. And so in spite of exile and dispersion, they cherished in the heart the tenets of their faith as it prevailed in Israel at that time. This brings us to an interesting factor, their occupation when they landed in India. History records that my ancestors took up the profession of oil pressing, and since they refused to work on Saturday, they were known as Shanivar Selis in Marathi, which means Saturday oil pressmen. Why did they take this particular profession, which was considered a profession of the low caste in India? Was it because, one, as strangers, they wanted to have low profile and keep the beautiful women away from the evil eye of the local people? Or, number two, was this their profession before landing in India, which may mean that probably my ancestors were from Nazareth, where there were plenty of olive trees, and that the inhabitants pursued this particular profession. A research on this subject will be in order. Then we have a big blind in the history of the Israelites till the 17th century, either because no serious research has been undertaken to explore the period in our history, or, quite possible, attempts were made, but it was customary in India to believe that history repeats itself, so very little was written or documented about this period. I must mention here the two great Venezuelan writers of history who have written a lot about us, the late Chaim Samuel Kehemka and Mr. Shalin Samuel. Later in the 18th century, as transport became relatively easier, the Venezuelans moved away from Konkan and began to spread in other areas and started practicing profession of those places. They also joined the army of Maratha, the East India Company, the British, and fought with distinction, and even continued after the India's independence. We were first enlightened about the changes, the reforms which took place in our absence in Judea around the middle of the 18th century by David Brahami, a Cochin Jew who came to Konkan and being a past man took up this task. Throughout our stay in India, the Indian Jews were well respected by all except for Israel. India is the only other country where Jews were never persecuted or discriminated against. In the land of our adoption, India, we enjoyed all civil and political rights, and we integrated to the extent of accepting Indian customs. But there has been no real assimilation, and we have retained our Jewishness. In this respect, and we are definitely we show the gratitude to the local population. The majority of them are Hindus whose religion teaches them to be loving and tolerant towards others. And I mention here that among other posts, the Venezuelites held in India were that of the Mayor of Bombay, that's Dr. Moses, commander in the army, the one who fought the Bangladesh war, and the secretary in the ministry, one Mr. Collins, and Advocate General of the Navy, Mr. Girard himself. The population of Indian Jews in 1984, as per statistics published by the local Jewish organization in Bombay, was 5,618, of which 4,354 were in Maharashtra state. By the way, Bombay is the capital of Maharashtra. Right now, the Jews of Bombay, the largest group, are faced with many problems. The numerical decrease in its population. About 35,000 Jews have left India and have settled in Israel. This means that institutions such as synagogues and schools, which once flourished, are today struggling to attract a the minimum number to conduct the prayers. There is also the emergence of problem associated with modernization. While the community until recently was residing around the synagogue, which was common practice in the old ages, in such places like Dongri, Umbalkari, Kala, they have, due to the quality of education and better jobs, moved away from the city for more luxurious way of life. Hence, we have a problem of constant communication within the community. Due to the stress that our ancestors placed on values of religion, and also due to the importance of class system in India, intermarriages are minimal compared to other Jewish communities around the world. The Sephardic Secondary School and the third Jacob School, the ORT, which once had 100% Jewish students, now have them as a minority group. The Jewish agency, which once used to send a full-time shaliach in Bombay, does not have one on the basis of cost-benefit analysis. And soon only empty synagogues and unused books will remain to tell the centuries-old proud history of the Jews of India. A couple of minutes more, in Israel we have a community 35,000 strong, and they have become one with the Israeli way of life. Of course, there are many Israeli synagogues and many Bnei Israel strongholds, like Lud, Ramlet, Petah Tikva, Ashdod, Yerushalayim, Beersheba, Haifa, etc., where they try to preserve our culture, tradition, tunes, and melodies. Large number of people have worked for important institutions like Israel Aircraft Industry, El Al Israel Airlines, and major defense-oriented industries. They have served the army like their counterparts, and many have risen to high ranks, among them children of Mrs. Flora. We still do not have much say in the political system that runs the state of Israel, mainly because we still are the immigrant generation, and we hope the next generation is bound to have greater say in the running of the state of Israel. There are national and local organizations of the Indian Jews settled there, sports groups which have made cricket sport a very popular game in Israel. And in fact, the World Maccabiah game has added cricket in its list. In the United States, we are very well established. We have a highly educated community. We have founded Congregation Bina, the organization of the Indian Jews settled in North America. And its founding father is here today, Mr. Sam Daniels, and Mr. Juraj is the president. And a final note, wherever the Bnei Israels may be, though our younger generation may not practice our unique customs and traditions, the one custom that will remain forever with the Bnei Israel is known as the Malida, the Eliyahu Hanavi ceremony. For some mysterious reason which need more research, Prophet Elijah occupies an honorable place in the homes of Bnei Israel, and no auspicious occasion goes by even today in the Bnei Israeli homes of India, USA, Israel, England and all, where this traditional ceremony is not performed. To end, you are witnessing the last of the fully practicing generation of this one glorious community. Attempts should be made now by the world jury to record and research the history with our assistance. In a matter of time, a few generations later, the question will be, Bnei Israeli, who? Thank you.
Mrs. Rosenstock, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to say how much I appreciate this opportunity of taking part in this seminar on the Jews of India, to speak especially on the Baghdadian section, which together with their brethren, the Bnei Israel and the Cochin Jews, comprise the bulk of Indian Jewry. There were other small groups of Afghan and Persian Jews, together with European Jewish refugees from Hitler's persecution. But these are outside the purview of our seminar. I would like to congratulate the Jewish Museum, Dr. Spector and Congregation Bina for their initiative in organizing the whole exhibition, and trust that some permanent record of this seminar and other events will be retained for future study and research. For I have observed that while our Ashkenazi brethren give much emotional support to Sephardi and Oriental Jews, who in fact today constitute the majority of Israel's Jewish population, they know little of their background and culture. So much remains to be done to stimulate intellectual effort. I am very pleased that the chair is taken tonight by my good friend, Mr. Elijah Gerard, whom I first met, as he said, when we were naval officers together 40 years ago during the Second World War. I have been uniquely privileged to have been involved in a tiny way in three of the greatest freedom movements in history: the war against Nazi fascism, the Zionist movement before the State of Israel was established in 1948, and the concluding phase of the Indian freedom struggle under Gandhi and Nehru. Mr. Chairman, the situation of the Jewish people, past and present, is fraught with interest, and I have described it by coining a phrase, the romance of being a Jew. That is, the vast diversity of background, origin and culture, girded together by a common faith and fate, making for the unity and continuity of our people. At present in London, there are over 1,000 members of the former Baghdadian Jewish communities of Bombay and Calcutta, and I include their children. They have 3 synagogues following the ancient Babylonian minhag, which they carried with them from India. Those in Golders Green and Stamford Hill, founded by the late Rabbi Solomon Sassoon, a great scholar and organizer, and more recently in Hendon, under the aegis of the Hillel brothers of Bombay, who are now working and living as rabbis in Jerusalem. Before going into further detail on the Indian Jews in London, I would like to sketch briefly an outline of their history in order to get into clearer perspective their present position. The Jews of Baghdad, Iraq, have maintained an unbroken connection with that region since their ancestors were carried captive to Babylon, which in fact is situated about 50 miles from Baghdad today, after the destruction of the first temple of Jerusalem 2,500 years ago. Cyrus in 538 BCE, which is comparable to the Balfour Declaration of our time. The Jews returned from Babylon to build the second temple, followed by another return 60 years later under Ezra and Nehemiah. Incidentally, the mass arrival of Iraqi Jews in the early 50s was called Operation Ezra and Nehemiah. And their tradition was carried on by Hillel the Great in the 1st century, after which the incomparable Babylonian Talmud was compiled and studied under the Gaonates of Surah and Ubedita and Nahardiyya till the 11th century. And this was followed by the period of Nessim, when Baghdad was part of the Ottoman Turkish Empire until its defeat in 1918. The modern state of Iraq was created by the British, which received its mandate from the League of Nations in 1922, as they had also received the mandate in the case of Palestine. The Jews prospered in Iraq under the British mandate, but many of them were forced to leave Iraq after the Rashid Ali pro-Nazi uprising in 1941, which was put down by British and Indian troops. The main emigration of Iraqi Jews to Israel took place in the early 1950s, and today there are only a few hundred left, mainly because of the terrible public hangings of Jews in Baghdad, which began under the present regime in 1969 when nearly 100 were killed. Baghdadian Jewish settlement began in India with the arrival of Jacob Sema in Surat, 200 miles north of Bombay, about 200 years ago. And this was shortly followed by the arrival of Shalom Cohen from Aleppo in Calcutta. Bombay has always been the main center of Jewish settlement in India, and the city, in general terms, is to the rest of India what New York is to the United States, the main port, commercial and industrial center, etc. With the arrival in Bombay of David Sassoon, who fled as a refugee from Baghdad in 1832, there followed the main streams of Baghdad Jewish emigrants to India and the Far East, and they pursued the pattern of activity set by David Sassoon, who founded the famous House of Sassoon. That is, business on the one hand and public service and charitable endeavor on the other. They founded schools, hospitals, institutes of science and welfare, referred to in the souvenir brochure, which has been published in Bombay in April this year, when the centenary of the Knesset Eliyahu Synagogue was celebrated. It was founded by my great-uncle Sir Jacob Sassoon. The celebrations were inaugurated by the President of India and widely reported. Present from abroad were Ben Haim and myself, and it was organized mainly by Sophie Kerr. Now, following the independence of India in 1947, there occurred the large-scale emigration of Jews, mainly for economic purposes. But in the case of Israel, it was for idealistic reasons, as we have never, thank God, suffered persecution in India. However, the Central Jewish Board of Bombay was set up in 1943 after anti-Semitic outbursts in the press occasioned by the then All India Muslim League, which founded Pakistan in 1947, in order to show solidarity with the Palestinian Arabs. Its first president was Sir Victor Sassoon, who was succeeded by Dr. Moses, whom John Perry referred to. The Bombay Zionist Association was set up in 1920. I was its honorary secretary in 1947 when the UN adopted the historic Palestine partition plan in this very city of New York. I mention it because India voted against the partition of Palestine, which provided for an Arab state and a Jewish state. I was called up by the police to explain Zionism. When I took the Bible and a voluminous history of the Jews, as Christ's history of the Jews, they were content to accept my word for the integrity of the BZA and its harmlessness. The BZA organized also the mass aliyah to Israel of many of Bombay's Jews. It is of interest to note that when the Bombay Jewish leaders in 1939 once sought Mahatma Gandhi's advice as to their possible role in the freedom movement, he advised them to steer clear of it, and I quote, lest their small community be crushed between the mighty conflicting forces of British imperialism, Congress nationalism, and Muslim separatism. All this is but a thumbnail sketch of the background of Indian Jewry. In London today, they work hard, and their adherence to the Baghdadian Babylonian Jewish tradition helps them to stem the tides of assimilation and intermarriage. The synagogue in Golders Green was set up in 1955 and called the Ohel David Synagogue after the father of Rabbi Solomon Sassoon. And that in Stamford Hill is called Gan Eden. I remember a meeting called by the Haham Dr. Gaon in 1955, he's retired, he lives here now, when David Elias, the secretary of the Eastern Jewish Synagogue and one of its founders, said, and I quote, "We want to stop our girls and boys from going out with yokes and shiksas." One of the Sephardi leaders of real Spanish descent repeated, "Yokes and shiksas?" in a mystified tone. When it was explained to him, he realized that the Indian Jewish newcomer had assimilated more rapidly than with the Ashkenazi than he or his family, who had lived for centuries in London. Incidentally, we also have to explain to him that the lobbyist is a Jewish boy who takes shiksas to pictures on Shabbos. I recall that when I paid my first visit to Israel in 1949, when I was privileged to meet President Weizmann and interview him, I also met a famous American Zionist leader who sounded equally mystified by the fact that Jews lived in India for thousands of years. He asked me, "Do you speak Yiddish?" And I replied, "Not a word." And he exclaimed, "And you call yourself Jews?" As they say, "Kasher liyot Yehudi," it is difficult to be a Jew. The synagogue in Hendon was founded about 2 years ago and is called Od Yosef Hai, the patriarch, to use the patriarch Jacob's famous words on hearing that his son Joseph was still living in Egypt. It is also so called after the famous Baghdadian rabbi Aham Yosef Haim, who was born in 1835. His outstanding work, Ben Ish Chai, is referred to very approvingly by Ashkenazi rabbis and others who know of it. The Sephardi Oriental rabbis have made immense contributions to the development of Jewish religious law and literature, and it is no wonder that this year is many Indian Jews in London have become very observant, and I attribute this to a desire also to adhere to something familiar from the old home. But as they say, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, the study of the Torah supersedes everything. For this they derive their strength. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is another fascinating thread in the intricate tapestry of Jewish life and activity, all adding up to the romance of being a Jew. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, and friends, I bring shalom from Israel. At the beginning itself, I thank the Wiener congregation as well as the museum, Jewish Museum of New York, for giving me this opportunity to say a few words about the Bnei Israel from the village of Pongtan to Israel. I mean, I'm going to highlight some of the Jewish style life of the Israel from the Kohen to Israel. I cannot boast of having done much of research on the subject, but my authority comes from the fact that I was born a Ben Israel, brought up as a Ben Israel, and have lived all my life among Ben Israels and non-Israel. Also among Ben Israels, because my activities are among the Ben Israels. I was born in Ashtuni, which is one of the villages of the continent, and lived there till the age of 18 when I had to go to Bombay to resume my studies at the University of Bombay. Some of the memories of my place are still fresh in my mind. In the village of Ashtuni, there was a synagogue which was built by my grandfather. He had 11 sons and an equal number of daughters from his 2 wives. He allocated a piece of land, fertile land, for the maintenance of the synagogue, so that the synagogue could maintain itself from the produce of the land. I still remember the synagogue. The picture of the Ben Israel going to the synagogue on Shabbat and on festivals is still fresh in my mind. Then is the melody of the Shabbat songs and the Kiddush prayers sung, heard from each Ben Israel house around my house. I remember the Selifot call. I think that has made a kind of an eternal memory in my ringing of the bell in my ears. I remember the morning Selifot call. Then the Shamash used to come to the Jewish mohallas, or in the corner in the gully or the lane, and call the names of the families. And I still remember